Okay, sir.
I think you have 25 minutes to make the presentation, 5 minutes for question, that's 30 minutes.
Perfect. I'll try to keep to the time, sir. Okay.
So by 5:52, should have been rounding up.
Very good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening all. I want to welcome us to this meeting. This evening, we will be talking, we'll be having a chat. It's going to be interactive. We'll be discussing cognitive radio networks, and our primary attention will be focused on spectrum. And this is just a brief outline of my presentation. We'll be just looking at a little bit of the intro, electromagnetic spectrum, facts about spectrum, cognitive radios, the characteristics, the network issues, security issues, and we'll also just slide into looking at the differences between conventional and cognitive radios, like we know. And just by way of this, I will.
I don't tie that road.
Which your side? Wow.
Okay. By way of introduction, I will just try to mention that there are certain key information that we need to take note of, and I'll be talking about primary users, and I'll be talking about secondary users. So when you see me talk about PU, I'll be referring to primary users, and when you hear me talk about SU, I'll be talking about secondary users. Then how we're going to integrate, how networks are integrated in terms of cognitive radio. So by introduction, cognitive radio is an emerging technique to increase the effective usage of spectrum in terms of in the technological space. You will note that there are rapid development in the number of wireless devices and gadgets all over the world. Statistics are shown from Cisco that there are now trillions and trillions of equipment that are in the tech space. And all of these devices, including those of the IoTs, are demanding for spectrum. Now, there's also increased demand in terms of the capacity. So these facilities are demanding higher capacity in the wireless networks due to the rapid growth also in the network resources. So all of these are demanding for this resource that is called spectrum. Let me just mention that spectrum should be used more efficiently to fulfill the need of all of these devices in terms of quantity and in terms of quality. I'm talking of in terms of bandwidth. We'll begin to just go down and begin to look at them gradually as we proceed. Now, the whole of this information is to let us know that the implication is that there must be optimum resource management in terms of spectrum. In terms of spectrum utilization, I need us to just have this as part of our thoughts as we proceed in this presentation. Now, all of us are here. We are all abreast with the radio frequency spectrum, ranging from the low frequency waves of around 10 kilohertz. Basically, it's actually supposed to be from 3.4 kilohertz, which is my voice and yours, and has a very long wavelength. Then we also look at the extreme end of 300 gigahertz, the millimeter wavelength. Now, the spectrum is a collection of all of these wavelengths of radio spectrum waves, which are available for wireless communications. The diagram below is something that all of us are very conversant with, looking at all the spectral portions as shown on the diagram. Now, this is just to let us know that the radio waves are all around us. They are very important, from the mobile phone you have in your hand, from the broadcast towers, from the satellite earth stations, to the radar, to the Wi-Fi routers we have, the BTSs, the satellite in the orbit, and even the sun itself. So we have all radio waves around us. So we need to be able to use them effectively and efficiently, depending on what service we have in mind. Oh my God, I don't know what I touched. I don't know what I touched. Sorry guys, I don't know what I touched.
Click on the page that you want to view.
Great. Yeah, the size is a little too big, so I'm trying to just. Okay, so the radio spectrum, like I just mentioned, is divided into frequency bands reserved for either for a single use or a range of compatible uses. You know, there are spectrum you can use for services like we look at the IMT, then you look at satellite, you look at primary, you can look at the secondary sharing, and you look at those of them that can actually share. So within each of these bands, individual transmitters often use separate frequencies or channels, so they do not interfere with each other. This is one of the primary functions of spectrum managers, to ensure that interference does not occur. And even if when it occurs, it can be handled, or mitigation should also take place. So some spectrum bands tend to be more congested, while other bands are relatively underutilized. So much of the spectrum bands are underutilized, like I mentioned. Spectrum, I've also told us, is one of the most challenging network resource, which needs to be carefully consumed or managed. You know, so the underutilized spectrum can be put into use through the mechanism known as spectrum holes, a technique used in cognitive radios. This is actually going to be one of the center points of this conversation this night, to let us know that spectrum that is licensed can be found to be underutilized. Therefore, what are we supposed to do? So we need, this is where the issue of cognitive radio comes to play, because cognitive radio has a lot of capabilities, a lot of intelligence, is very reprogrammable, and has that capacity to change its environment and utilize spectrum, which is under normal circumstances supposed to be used by the license operator, but it's not being used. So on its own, it can understand that that spectrum is available, and it can use it for a service and returns it to the licensed persons at a very, very, very unnoticeable speed. So spectrum hole in cognitive spectrum is technically defined as frequency band in which, like I mentioned before, a secondary user, a secondary service can transmit without interfering with the primary service. Like I mentioned before, the primary service, the primary user is that person who has that license. For instance, your phone, you are on MTN or Airtel, you're on a licensed network. So there's spectrum that is around your phone that you're supposed to be using. We're saying at a point, a certain time, you are not using that phone. That does not mean that that spectrum is not available. We're saying that because you are the primary user, the service is there for you to use. But when you are not using it, cognitive radio has the opportunity, has that ability, that intelligence to take that spectrum that you ought to be using and use it and deliver services without you knowing. If you take a look at this drawing, you find out that in terms of power and time, you have the frequency chart on the frequency band here. Now, you look at the dark part of this drawing. This is what is supposed, you, that is the primary user, that's the space you're supposed to occupy. But at the end, you now see that on the white parts, these are always free. They are not in use. So the cognitive radio has that ability to take over those spaces and use them. Let's go to the next slide and you see exactly what I'm talking about. If you take a look at this picture on the screen, you notice that on this side, on where my cursor is, you notice that we have some blank spaces, we have gray spaces, we have white spaces. Now, on the spectral arrangement, you have this bar, you have the provisions for like the 900 or the 800 and the 1800, like where the GSM, you have like our 3G, you have the TV like the 470, then you have the PMR, which is like the 360 and less than 471. Then you have like the FM radio from the 88 to 102. Now, all of these channels are lined up and properly aligned. However, there are some of those spaces that are not in use. Let's take a look at this drawing and just give us a little bit of an idea. If you look at this drawing, you will notice that you have bunch of services that are here. Then you have channels. Take a closer look at this picture. You will notice that this, where my cursor is, where you have these rails, are like more or less like the channels, but the users are not. There are no users. You see that the whole of the space is very empty. Now these people you are the primary users and are supposed to occupy the whole of these channels. Unfortunately, these channels are left empty. It's just like what you and I can also discuss with your phones, and the channel that you ought to be using are left bare. So now take a look at the second drawing. You now see that the primary users, you can see pick out where they are. But unfortunately, those other channels, all those spaces that are available are now being used by cognitive radio user. In this case, all of these empty channels you see on this picture are now occupied. And when they are occupied, what are they actually doing? They are being used to deliver service to you and I, to people. So in whole essence is that the whole system is very, very, very optimally utilized. But we need to look at certain parameters to understand how the technology actually operates. Before I leave this slide, I just want to also mention that you can actually do a head count of the primary users on these channels. You can also do a head count of the cognitive radio users. But the beauty of it is that when a primary user arrives, you will notice that these secondary users will automatically vacate the spectrum. So, cognitive radio, we are saying that the radio that is aware of its surroundings and adapts intelligently. Therefore, it has the ability to sense for the spectrum holes, especially, the spectrum holes I'm talking about, idle spectrum slots that are not being used, and opportunistically transmit on it. It's indeed an emerging technique to increase the effective usage of spectrum to meet the growing demands of radio spectrum, since it has the capacity to dynamically assess the spectrum hole in the absence of a primary user. This is the point that I'm trying to just bring out. Now, FCC defined cognitive radio to be that radio that can change its transmitter parameters. More so, the whole definition is to say it is very reconfigurable based on interaction with the environment in which it operates, because it has that tendency to even operate on a wide band. Now, how does the cognitive radio operate in the real sense in terms of the loop? First and foremost, it has antenna and it does sensing. So with the sensing, it's able to look at the real time and at a very low power in a wide band. So it has to, first of all, also analyze the condition of that available hole, and a decision is made to either say that available spectrum hole is either good in terms of spectral density, in terms of signal to noise ratio, in terms of interference, and in terms of even any form of attack or bugging. And when that decision is made that that particular spectrum hole is usable, then it turns in, it configures itself and quickly takes that particular spectrum and begin to deliver service. I need us to just have a little bit an overview to also understand that the cognitive radio can come in different flavors to have a network to be able to deliver services. Now we'll be looking at ad hoc network, maybe at the later part of the slide, and the different type of like the mesh networks. But what you have on the screen is just to give you an idea that you have a primary base station, for instance, on 700, and you have ability to transmit the signal straight down to the operators, to the mobile system, the mobile phone, and the rest. However, we're saying that there is also the cognitive part that is independently on its own to ensure that when this spectrum, for instance, on 700, like I mentioned, is not in use. Imagine where you are at this moment, and the next couple of minutes or hours you live there. You are not living with the spectrum that is in that location. The spectrum still stays there. So what's going to happen? That spectrum is unavailable and unutilized. So the point we're trying to make is that this particular cognitive radio can stay by the side and opportunistically take that spectrum where you are not there and use it to deliver quality service without even you knowing. This is the beauty of what cognitive radio does. Now, like mentioned earlier, there will be RF stimuli on the radio environment, sensing takes place, a decision is made, and the sharing takes place and service is delivered. Now, I just mentioned to us about this particular characteristics of cognitive radio. And one of the major areas that we also try to pay attention is about spectrum sensing, because cognitive radio, we need to sense the spectrum to be able to use it. And a lot of models are actually in place. A lot of people have worked on different models like the Markov theory. Some have done the artificial neural network. Some people are also working on tensor analysis to look at the spectrum sensing technique of cognitive radios. Then the cognitive radio on sensing takes accurate coordination, the location of the holes. But because of the intelligence, it will be able to know when, because you can imagine a situation, you're on 700 with your mobile phone or probably your laptop on Wi-Fi on 700, and you turn it off, and a secondary user occupies that hole, and you just turn on your system at once. We're saying that the level of the intelligence of cognitive radio is such that that connectivity that is maintaining before you turn on your system, it will leave that space for you and automatically goes to another place without that network being disconnected. This is the beauty of what we're looking at. Now, there's also the network system discovery. Because imagine a scenario where you are probably using a secondary network now for instance, for surgery. And all of a sudden, the primary user arrives. So how will that surgery be able to continue? So these are the intelligence that are embedded on this radio. And I think as team of engineers, there's need for us to look at the best way and the best algorithm and the best analysis for to make our input on cognitive radios to ensure that this connectivity in terms of TCP, in terms of UDP, is achieved at least 99.999 to 8 in terms of reliability. Now, I just mentioned also to us that it has this recoverable capabilities because of its frequency agility and the dynamic frequency selection algorithm. It also has a very good adaptive modulation and coding techniques, and the transmit systems and the networks of cognitive radios are always active. So, having said that, cognitive radios, like I mentioned earlier, can self-organize its communication based on senses, like I said, and in terms of recoverable functions. I mentioned to us that in terms of architecture, the cognitive radio, if you take a look at what we have on this drawing, you will notice that there's a primary base station. Again, I come back to tell you again, like consider 700 megahertz spectrum or a BTS, I don't know, 800 or 900, for instance. Now, it's a license in a licensed band, like I said, you have the opportunity to have transmission from your mobile phone to the BTS. You can also consider even a Wi-Fi that is also in an unlicensed band, like the 2.4 on the ISM band. You can also take a look, imagine that. Now, but on the other side, with a cognitive radio that is depending solely on the spectrum that the primary user is not using, it's also a very large network that is divided into two, that you have the infrastructure part and the non-infrastructure part in terms of the ad hoc architecture, where you have like your PC and you have some little bit of access into wireless, like a typical Wi-Fi network. But there's a core network also with heavy infrastructure that the whole cognitive radios are attached to. The beauty of all of this is that this network has a very good IP network links that will be able to look at the positions of the primary user at all times and ensure that this network that is built without a network resource is also able to deliver service so seamlessly and effectively. Now, let me just also say here that cognitive radio can also be prone to attacks. But probably before I continue this, I will need to just let us know that in case a network of this magnitude is built without a network resource, just depending on its ability to recognize spectrum holes, it therefore brings a question to all of us that if a network like this can ride on a secondary spectrum, it means also that there is a secondary spectrum. It also means that the primary spectrum, which is even the license, is not optimally utilized. It means also that if you want to adopt some policies, or if you want to say, okay, it's either you are going to do like use it or lose it, it's something to think about. So it also means that this same spectrum, if I'm talking of the secondary spectrum now, the secondary available one that this large network is domiciled on, is available, it means we can also think deeper to know that we can do spectrum evaluation on those unused spectrum and also see if it's also possible to either auction, sell, or just think of alternative. But before we continue on that conversation, let me just bring you to know that the nature of the cognitive radio in itself, especially the spectrum hole, is also prone to attack. Because sometimes there might be a case of interference and the cognitive radio.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay, wow. Okay. Summary, just to let you know that there could be attacks, there could be misinterpretation of spectrum holes by cognitive radios. Therefore, those missed opportunities, they become missed opportunity for secondary users. An attack is considered strong if it involves minimum number of issues or minimum operations by causing maximum damage or losses to those primary users. However, before I quickly just round up, let me just also mention that cognitive radio networks have now been deployed for public safety, for disaster relief, and in military networks, and also for these networks. This is exactly the kind of pictorials I was trying to talk about. You have like a military network, you have emergency networks, and you have like regular multimedia cellular network. Let's quickly just look at the difference in these two, a regular network that we're operating now and the cognitive radio. We're saying that the conventional system we have must operate, in an interference-free spectrum. But the cognitive radio functions in challenging conditions because it has to keep reading keeps reading until he finds the one he can use. But the conventional one we also know is unable to dynamically change parameters. It just stays in one particular place, and any little encumbrance on it, you are going to hear a shout of interference. Community radio wouldn't do that because it will quickly identify those use gaps, and if that particular one is not good, it's going to move to another one. In terms of our conventional systems, they view congested spectrum as essentially unusable for communication due to heavy interference, and they walk away. But the community radio will fine tune and will find other spectrums if interference is detected or when there's a malicious attack, and determine if the interference has reached an acceptable level before it goes into another hole. In conclusion, the radio spectrum is statistically allocated and divided between licensed and unlicensed users. Cognitive radio is a recent network paradigm that enables a more flexible and efficient usage of radio spectrum. The status of wireless channels can change due to several reasons in cognitive radio, such as node mobility, operating frequency, neighbor interference, neighbor transmission power, and primary user appearances. Secondary users, which have low priority, they don't even have priority at all, exploit this spectrum in such a way that they do not cause interference to primary user at all. Thank you so much for listening.
That was so good. So good. The floor is open for comments, questions, answers. We have 5 minutes to do that. That means by 6. I heard you during the course of the presentation talk about primary spectrum and secondary spectrum. Is there really primary spectrum or primary users of spectrum and secondary users?
Yeah, you're right, sir. It's actually primary users and secondary users. But the direction we are trying to look at is that a time will come where those spectrum that the primary users are supposed to be using may become a secondary spectrum, because we might need to advance the cost to either take it from them, auction it, and both will be running seamlessly. In that case, you now actually have the primary spectrum and the secondary spectrum, but that is a futuristic thing.
All right, is that it?